No, this can't be happening to me. Marisha's choked cry echoed in the dark room where the scent of sea salt mingled with tears. In Savannah, Georgia, everyone thought she was the happiest woman alive, newly married to the perfect man. But no one knew that just hours ago, she had seen him embracing another woman under the dim lights of the pier. And worse, tonight her elderly mother had confessed a truth that shattered her heart, that man was her own blood. Amid the sound of waves and the strains of blues music drifting from the harbor street, Marisha knew her life would never be the same unless she left it all behind. In the early mornings, Savannah carries a beauty both dreamy and gritty. The sea wakes the city with the rhythmic sound of waves, threading through the cobblestoned streets, blending with the briny scent of salt and, here and there, the spicy hint of cinnamon wafting from the kitchens of family eateries. At the seaside fish market, where each fish is laid neatly on wooden trays and the vendors' cries stretch out like an old song, Marisha grew up amid those sounds and scents. Her childhood was woven from blazing golden noons, running barefoot over wet sand, and evenings sitting beside Mrs. Lucinda, who raised her in her mother's stead, listening to stories about the sea, about love, and about what people must trade away to keep their honor. It was in this place that seemed as if it would never change that Marisha met Derek. Derek was an orphan who came to Savannah at the age of 12. Mrs. Lucinda's family opened their arms to him, giving him a home and a place in the community. He was tall, with eyes dark as the sea on a moonless night, and a way of smiling that made others forget all their troubles. To Marisha, Derek was not only a childhood friend, but an indispensable part of her world. As they grew up, feelings that had been as quiet as undercurrents suddenly surged. They began to write a shared story in which anyone could see the light of destiny. People in the market called them the couple of the sea, two fitting pieces, blending like the tide and the shore. On their wedding day, Savannah put on the pure white of bouquets floating on the water. The beat of djembe drums rose from afar, the rhythm like the heartbeat of Mother Earth, mingling with the warm voices of the elder women and mothers from the fishing village. Sea wind slipped through Marisha's hair, carrying with it the belief that this love would never fade. Derek stood there, his eyes lit with a silent promise, a promise to hold her hand along the entire road of life. But life does not always keep its word like a song. Just a month after the wedding, the first signs of fracture began to creep into every moment. Derek's gaze sometimes drifted, as if following a horizon Marisha could not see. Touches that had once been warm became awkward and few. He came home later, quieter, and sometimes stood looking out at the sea for too long, as if waiting for a wave to bring something back from afar. Marisha tried to tell herself that every marriage has rainy days. She tidied the house, prepared dinners fragrant with cinnamon and lemon to wait for him, but there was still only one person at the table. When night fell, she listened to the waves as if searching for answers to the ever-widening gaps. Then rumors began to creep through the market. Little remarks, soft enough to slip into the ear, yet sharper than knives. Derek has a woman in Atlanta. A woman in a red dress, appearing with him in a corner of a cafe near the train station. A touch more intimate than necessary, a smile he had not given Marisha since the wedding day. Savannah remained the same, the sea still blue, the market still bustling, but for Marisha, everything had changed color. With each step through the neighborhood, she felt looks of pity, curiosity, and something tinged with regret. In her heart, the question kept growing. When did Derek lose his way? And if the waves had carried him far, did she have the strength to pull him back? Autumn rain in Savannah fell softly like silver threads, stitching fragments of memory together, yet cold enough to remind people that summer had gone. Marisha sat by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked cobblestone street, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of hot tea. She wanted to believe that those clouds would eventually drift away, like every petty quarrel in a marriage, but deep inside, a thin layer of ice was forming, slippery and dangerous. Derek still came home every night, but he was no longer the man she once knew. The heavy footsteps on the wooden porch, the slow turn of the key in the lock, as if he were delaying the moment he had to face her. A cloyingly sweet, unfamiliar perfume clung to his clothes, a scent that had never before existed in this house. There were nights when Marisha woke to find Derek sitting in a chair, his back to the bed, his shoulders trembling slightly, as if hiding a sigh or a memory he didn't want to share. The light from the table lamp cast strange shadows across his face. The eyes that had once been warm now seemed distant, holding a kind of thought she could not reach. She began to notice the absences, the dinners he missed, the mornings he left earlier than necessary, the phone calls he would only answer outside. In the market, as whispers still wove through every fish stall, Marisha forced a smile, trying to build a thin wall to shield herself. But thin walls always crack, and rumors never disappear. She tried to rekindle warmth with small gestures, a meal featuring his favorite dish, a neatly folded new blanket on the chair, a handwritten card placed beside his morning coffee. Derek smiled, but that smile felt more like a polite gift than a reaction from the heart. It made Marisha feel like a guest trying to maintain manners in her own home. Each night, the sound of waves lapping against the hulls at the pier felt like a countdown. She listened, imagining each wave as a warning. Something was drifting away. In moments alone, she wondered if love was truly strong enough to keep someone from leaving, or merely a story we tell ourselves to cling to. As the city began to fall asleep, Savannah no longer carried the shouts of the market, only the sound of wind and the stray notes of jazz from a small corner bar. Marisha stood on the balcony, gazing far out where the shoreline met the horizon. She searched for a sign, a reason, anything to believe Derek still belonged to her. But the only thing reflected in her eyes was distance, a distance wider than the ocean. That night, for the first time, Marisha thought about following Derek. The thought made her feel both ashamed and hurt, because it meant admitting she had lost her trust. But once the seed of doubt had taken root, it grew quickly, slipping into every empty space in her mind. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing viewers from all over come together here. Or comment 1 if you're intrigued and want to hear the rest of the story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching this video from. That night, the moon shone so brightly that the sea seemed covered in a thin layer of gold, shimmering and eerily still. Savannah lay steeped in that magical light, as if everything had been dyed in a shade of nostalgia. Marisha stood in the shadow of the porch roof, quietly watching Derek's figure as he stepped out the door. He wore a dark coat, collar turned up to block the wind, but his hands rested loosely, buried deep in his pockets, the posture of a man carrying a decision long considered. She waited until the sound of his footsteps merged into the night, before gently closing the door and following. Her shoes pressed into the small puddles left by the afternoon rain, sending ripples across the street's surface. The cobblestone road led into narrow alleys where the damp smell of mildew mingled with the scents of tobacco and liquor drifting from the bars. Blues music trickled from a dark corner, the deep, husky voice of a male singer telling a story of love and betrayal from generations past. Marisha kept far enough away so her shadow would not merge with his. Each time he paused, she held her breath, pressing herself against a mottled brick wall, her heartbeat pounding so hard it felt as though it might be heard outside her chest. In her mind, images of Derek from the past, his smile, his eyes, his warm hands, intertwined with what she was seeing now, as if trying to convince her that all this was just a misunderstanding. But the stiffness in his shoulders with every step denied her the comfort of self-deception. The alley opened onto an abandoned pier, where rotting wooden posts jutted from the dark water like the giant fingers of the sea. The wind from offshore blew in, carrying the tang of salt and the clink of mooring lines knocking against the hulls of weathered boats. Derek quickened his pace, as if drawing closer to something important. Marisha stopped in a patch of darkness between two warehouses. From where she could see clearly the moon-washed planks of the pier, and then she saw it. The woman stood leaning against the wooden railing, long curly hair spilling over her shoulders, catching the moonlight like strands of copper thread. A form-fitting red dress clung to her figure, a striking contrast to the surrounding shades of gray and brown. As Derek approached, his eyes lit up with a brightness Marisha had not seen in a long time. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. In that moment, she heard the soft click of the lid opening and the gold gleam of a ring reflected in the woman's eyes. They exchanged few words, but his fingers trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her hand. Marisha felt as though her whole body had been plunged into icy water. It wasn't just that he had given a symbol of lifelong commitment to someone else, it was the way he looked at her. The look of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. The sea wind whistled through the gaps in the wood, and the ropes rasping against the pier's posts seemed to mark a slow, deliberate countdown to her pain. Marisha stood still for a long time, letting the image burn itself into her memory, as if she needed proof to believe she wasn't dreaming. When Derek turned to leave, the woman's hand waved softly, the ring flashing one last time before darkness swallowed everything. Marisha stepped back, pressing herself into the shadows, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would betray her presence. She knew from that moment on, nothing could return to the way it had been. But the question was the truth she had just witnessed only the surface of a deeper secret? At night, the Savannah Sea was like a giant mirror, reflecting both the moonlight and the secrets that had never been spoken. Marisha returned from the pier with hands ice cold, but not from the wind. Each step along the wooden plank path was a heavy thud of her heart, as if her body were trying to prolong the road home to avoid having to face the truth. The house came into view, its dark red roof tiles glowing under the silver moonlight. The bedroom door was ajar, a faint light spilling through the gap, but Marisha did not stop. Her feet carried her straight to the front porch, where the sound of the waves could reach her mind to either soothe it or tear it open. Mrs. Lucinda was sitting there, her figure like part of the old wooden chair, her eyes not turned toward the house but fixed on the ocean. In the moon's glow, her face was both gentle and layered with an unreadable depth of thought. Her silver hair lifted lightly in the wind, like fine threads pulled long by time. Far offshore, the sea's surface seemed to move in an unusual way. A faint light flickered beneath the water, then grew clearer golden scales gleaming, catching the moonlight in shimmering sparks. A figure rose with the gentle swell, long hair drifting, eyes so deep they seemed to hold the ocean's hidden treasures, the golden-scaled mermaid. Marisha had heard the legend since she was a child. People said that whenever the mermaid appeared on a moonlit night, it was a sign that a long-buried truth was ready to surface. Some believed she brought good fortune, others feared her as a harbinger of loss. But tonight, for Marisha, the gaze from those eyes felt like a silent urging. Don't let this secret live any longer. Mrs. Lucinda did not turn when Marisha stepped closer. Her eyes stayed anchored to the offshore waters, where the mermaid's form drifted and then disappeared beneath the waves. In that moment, the distance between them was not just a few paces. It was as if an entire lifetime had passed without ever touching each other's truths. Marisha stood still, her fingers curling lightly around the porch's wooden railing, feeling the grain that had weathered with time. She wanted to ask, to speak, to pour out everything she had just witnessed at the pier. But her throat was dry, and her breath seemed only enough to keep her standing. Mrs. Lucinda tilted her head slightly, as if sensing the eyes watching her, yet remained silent. The sound of waves breaking mixed with the wind hissing through the row of wooden posts beneath the porch. Moonlight fell on them both, blurring the boundaries between reality and dream. For a moment, Marisha wondered if Mrs. Lucinda knew anything about the woman in the red dress. Could it be that she, too, carried a secret the sea had guarded for far too long? The moonlight, the mermaid, and her grandmother, three things existing together on a night like this, could not be mere coincidence. She sat down beside her, her eyes searching for some sign from that aged face, but all she found was silence. Silence as though the entire ocean was holding its breath, waiting for the next moment. The sea wind that night no longer felt like a gentle lullaby. It hissed through the gaps in the wood, slipped into every seam of clothing, carrying a chill so sharp it made even the railing tremble beneath Marisha's hands. Mrs. Lucinda remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the far horizon, as if searching for something where the moon melted into the sea. Then, suddenly, she turned, her eyes clouded with age yet still sharp as a blade slicing through the thick silence between them. Her thin, bony hand clasped Marisha's. The grip was both a plea and a command to let go. In a slow breath, she let fall words heavy as stone. Derek is not who you think he is. His blood is your blood. He is your brother. Time seemed to shatter. The sounds of the waves, the wind, the faint rattle of wooden shutters all receded, leaving a dense emptiness in Marisha's chest. She heard each beat of her heart, yet could no longer feel her feet on the ground. The world around her became like a painting drained of color, leaving only the blurred outlines of reality. Moonlight fell across Mrs. Lucinda's face, etching deep wrinkles like carvings of time and guilt. Her voice trembled but was resolute, each word a blade cutting into the memories she had buried. She told how, years ago, in the chaos of Hurricane Katrina, she had lost her newborn son. In the floodwaters and darkness, she'd had only enough time to hear a single brief cry before he was swept from her arms. Years later, at a relief station on the Georgia coast, she met a 12-year-old boy whose eyes were the color of the sky before a storm. No papers, no family, only a name Derek. She had brought him to Savannah, raising him as though he were a gift the sea had returned. Never had she thought, or perhaps never dared to think, that he might be the son she had lost. But as Derek grew, there were strange signs a mother's heart could not ignore. A small scar on his leg, a way of smiling identical to his late father's pro. She kept silent, too afraid to face the truth, because it would mean another tragedy that her two children had unknowingly fallen in love. Marisha sat in stillness, her heart like a piece of fabric torn in two. The love she had cherished, the memories she had treasured, were now steeped in taboo. Every image of Derek became a thorn driven back into her heart. Mrs. Lucinda went on, her voice dropping like waves breaking against a rocky shore. She had hoped that, as the feelings between Marisha and Derek grew, one of them would drift away. But fate had only bound them tighter. She had resolved many times to speak, but each time she saw the joy in their eyes, she faltered. It wasn't until she saw the shadow of the woman in the red dress that she knew time had run out. Marisha did not cry. Her tears felt frozen, leaving only a cold emptiness spreading through her body. She looked out to sea, where the gold glimmer of the mermaid had just flashed before vanishing, and wondered if the mermaid had known this truth all along. A wave stronger than the rest crashed against the pier's posts, scattering white foam like a warning. Marisha realized then that every secret, no matter how deeply buried, will find a way to rise just like that golden light, never to be swallowed by darkness forever. Mrs. Lucinda's hand was still there, gripping tightly as if afraid that letting go would let the truth sweep Marisha away. But Marisha knew this moment had changed everything: love, family, and herself. My dear viewers, stay tuned for the next part that will leave you in awe. Take a second to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all over the world. The night wind still swept across the porch, but to Marisha, the sound of it now carried other echoes: the screams, the crashing, the rush of water flooding the streets. That was when Mrs. Lucinda allowed the old memories to find their way back. Memories she had locked away for decades, now forced open. She began to speak, her voice sinking as though she were conversing with her own past. Many years ago, before Savannah became her harbor, she had lived in New Orleans. It was a city of jazz, of brilliant Mardi Gras nights, but also a place where injustice and storms always lurked nearby. When riots broke out over racial tension and poverty, and then Hurricane Katrina struck like a blade into the soul of the city, everything she had known was torn apart. In those days, Mrs. Lucinda was just a young mother, clutching her newborn son. Her wooden house sat in a low-lying area, and the floodwaters rose faster than the calls for help. She remembered the moment vividly, the sound of helicopters overhead, voices calling to one another across the black churning waters, and her son's faint cries threading through the rain like a strand about to snap. A massive wave crashed in, sweeping away everything: furniture, windows, and the cradle she had touched for the last time. She lunged after it, but the water's force was stronger than any human strength. The baby was gone, leaving a hollow space that could never be filled. After Katrina, she left New Orleans with nothing but empty hands and a heart carved out. She came to Savannah hoping to find a peaceful place to continue living, but the memory of losing her child lingered like a shadow. She found solace in helping the coastal community, caring for children abandoned after the storm, as if repaying a debt to fate. Years later, on a supply trip to a small port town, she met a 12-year-old boy huddled beside a heap of old fishing nets. His eyes were the color of the sea under gray skies, holding the guardedness and fatigue of someone who had endured too much loss. He had no papers, no family, only a name: Derek. When she asked, he said only that he had come from somewhere far away and had no one left. She brought Derek home like a gust of wind, carrying a stray seed to a new shore. Slowly he settled in, called her mother, and became part of the fish market community where Marisha had grown up. She loved him no differently than if he had been her own flesh and blood, but deep down, she still thought of him as the child the sea had sent, never imagining that fate had looped back to return her lost son. And then, when Derek grew older, small signs began to appear. A scar on his left leg, identical to the one the baby had sustained at birth, the habit of tilting his head when he smiled just like his late father. Her heart quivered with fear and tightened with the realization of the truth. But when feelings blossomed between Derek and Marisha, she stayed silent. She told herself she would find a way to stop them, but each time she was about to speak, she saw the light in their eyes, and her hand faltered. When the wedding took place, she could only stand in the crowd, clutching an old string of beads, silently praying the truth would remain buried forever. But the sea, as she had long known, never keeps secrets. And tonight, the golden shimmer of the mermaid had appeared, signaling the moment could no longer be delayed. Marisha sat there, listening to every word, as though each sound carved another tear into the fabric of her life. The image of Derek lover, husband, now intertwined with the image of a brother she had never known. She wondered, if fate had bound them together with both love and blood, was there any path forward that would not wound them both? There are secrets which, once sown into the depths of the sea, seem as though they will sleep forever beneath the waves and sand. But Mrs. Lucinda knew well the sea only keeps them the way it keeps a clam closed tight, waiting for a great wind to pry it open. From the first night, she realized that Derek and Marisha were not merely two people who had found each other, but two streams of blood running in the same vein. She had lived in a constant, gnawing fear. She had once thought that, if Derek looked at Marisha long enough, he would sense something was wrong, that some instinct would make him step back, leave her before their feelings crossed a forbidden line. But Derek did not leave. Instead, he drew closer, stayed longer, letting their eyes meet more often than an unwitting brother ever should. Many times, she had thought of calling Derek in, sitting him down on the porch, and telling him everything. But each time she opened her mouth, the image of Marisha's eyes appeared, eyes that still trusted her completely. And then she swallowed the words like swallowing a stone into her stomach, cold and heavy. She told herself that perhaps one day they would choose different paths, and the secret would die of old age with her. But the days passed like waves pressing toward the shore. Derek grew into a man, and so did Marisha. They did not drift apart, but found every way to bind themselves closer. Each time she saw them preparing goods together at the market, their laughter mingling with the vendors' calls, she felt both joy and tearing pain. It was a contradiction that had stolen her sleep for years. Joy in seeing her two children together, and pain in knowing that their love was built on a foundation that could never be accepted. The day Derek knelt to propose to Marisha by the shore, amid the beat of djembe drums and the white flowers set adrift on the water, she had stood far away, clutching her mother's old bead necklace, feeling as though she were witnessing a towering wave rise but could not warn anyone. The mermaid had not appeared that night, but in her dreams she saw golden scales flash beneath the sea's surface and heard a whisper, "Every truth will return." She had hoped that Derek, in a moment of weakness, would confess to Marisha before the wedding, that he would let her step away with dignity, spared from the pain of being bound by a forbidden tie. But Derek had chosen silence. He married her, slid the ring onto her finger, and buried the story with Mrs. Lucinda, as though the two of them were complicit with the sea in keeping a summer that would never end. Silence, she thought, is a double-edged blade. It preserves peace in the present, but cuts into the conscience each night. She had lived each day with that feeling, trying to read every glance between them, searching for any sign that the truth was leaking through. But they still laughed, still lived as though everything were in its rightful place. Only she knew everything had been misaligned from the start. When Marisha sat beside her tonight, just back from the pier, Mrs. Lucinda knew the time for silence had ended. The depth in her eyes, full of unspoken questions, was a mirror reflecting back all the years Mrs. Lucinda had avoided. And when the golden shimmer of the mermaid flashed offshore, she knew she could not keep the secret for another tide. The moment Mrs. Lucinda's confession faded, a thick, suffocating silence settled over the porch. Marisha sat motionless, as if a massive wave had just swept away the entire world she knew, leaving her stranded and exposed in the middle of the ocean. Each heartbeat echoed in her chest like a hammer, driving her deeper into a new reality, a reality where her love was no longer light, but a shadowed place tainted with taboo. Tears spilled over, salty as seawater, touching the corner of her lips and making her shiver. She recalled every moment she had trusted, every glance exchanged with Derek, every time his hand had clasped hers, as if promising a lifetime. All of it now felt like shards of broken glass, each one reflecting the image of an accomplice in a long-held lie, and at the center of it stood no one but herself. Mrs. Lucinda still held her hand, but Marisha no longer felt the warmth. That grip now seemed like a tether keeping her close while binding her tight. She knew that if she let slip a single word of blame, it would cut into the old woman's heart like a knife. But silence felt no different than swallowing a mouthful of salt, letting it corrode her slowly from within. The sea wind blew harder, carrying the scent of seaweed and damp wood tangling her hair. For a fleeting moment, she thought of Derek. He had known all along. He had stood there, placed the ring on her finger, pledged his vows, kissed her forehead, all while keeping this secret locked deep inside. That betrayal was not only a betrayal of their love, it was a betrayal of her very being, the person who had trusted him to her very core. She rose, her steps unsteady as though she had just stepped off a swaying boat. Everything around her, the sound of waves, the moonlight, the smell of the sea, suddenly felt foreign. Even this house, once her refuge, now seemed to watch her with the cold eyes of someone who knew everything but said nothing. Mrs. Lucinda called her name, her voice rough and low, but Marisha didn't turn back. She stepped into the house, down the dark hallway leading straight to the bedroom, where Derek had yet to return. Each step was a count toward the questions she was about to ask, questions she knew would have no answer strong enough to mend this wound. In the room, she sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on the empty space ahead. In her mind, memories unspooled in reverse. Derek laughing as they prepared fish together at the market, the afternoon they rode far out to watch the sunset, the tight embrace during a stormy night. All of it now only weighed her heart down further. Marisha knew this truth would not only destroy her love. If it were to come out, it might also break Mrs. Lucinda's heart, the heart that had endured the loss of a child for so many years. But it was also the act of keeping this secret for so long that had driven her into this tragedy, a tragedy even the vastness of the sea could not wash away. Outside, the waves pounded the shore like a reminder that time moves on, no matter how many hearts are broken. And somewhere offshore, the golden-scaled mermaid was perhaps diving deep, carrying her question to the bottom of the ocean. Was there still a way out that did not mean leaving herself behind? Can you guess what will happen next? Take a moment to relax. Comment 1 or "I'm still here" to continue listening. The moon cast a cold silver layer over the old wooden planks, stretching Marisha's shadow across the porch floor like a silhouette drifting away from itself. From afar came the sound of waves, mingling with the fragile song of the mermaid. Like a long strand of starlight, the sea wind had skillfully drawn past her ear. Each note seemed to carve deeper into the decision her heavy heart had already made. She turned to look at Mrs. Lucinda. Her face, in the flickering light of the oil lamp hanging by the door, bore the weariness of a life carrying both loss and secrets. The deep lines on her skin were not only from age, but from years pressed down by the shadow of truth. Marisha stepped closer and knelt at her feet. Her hands cradled the frail shoulders, the warmth of her flesh bringing both comfort and a stabbing ache. Her voice dropped low, not trembling, but weighted with restrained pain. "I will leave, but I won't let this secret be the stain that marks the end of your life." Those words, once spoken, carried the weight of both release and despair. Marisha knew that if she stayed, each day would be lived in a cycle of deceit and haunting. But leaving was not running away. It was the only way to keep her mother, the woman who had lost a child and quietly found him again, from being shamed before the community, from spending the rest of her days under the scrutiny and whispers of others. Mrs. Lucinda did not answer right away. Her eyes opened wide, then closed, as if Marisha's words had drained the last of her remaining strength. Her breaths grew longer, deeper, like someone who had swum a long stretch of sea and finally touched the shore, knowing she could never turn back. Marisha rose and walked toward the bedroom. She opened the wooden wardrobe, darkened by years, and took out a small suitcase. The soft click of the latch sounded so sharp in the stillness that she imagined even the sea had paused to listen. Each item placed inside carried a piece of memory, the scarf Derek had wrapped around her neck on their first cold night together, a photograph of the three of them at a summer festival, the pink-shelled scallop he had said would keep their love as enduring as the waves and the shore. When her hand touched the scallop, she froze. Derek's image came so vividly to mind she had to close her eyes. Part of her heart wanted to scream, to run and find him, to demand the truth, to force him to admit the pain he had buried alongside his mother. But the other part knew that any answers would only make the wound bleed more. Outside, the waves crashed harder, as if urging her on. The mermaid sang again, distant yet distinct, her voice flowing like a farewell to one about to leave the shore. Marisha rolled the suitcase onto the porch. Mrs. Lucinda was still sitting there, her eyes open, no longer looking out to sea but into the darkness, ahead the darkness Marisha was about to step into. She bent down and pressed a soft kiss to the old woman's forehead, leaving behind a warmth like a silent promise. No more tears fell, only a deep breath, and then her feet began to move across the threshold. Marisha's figure slowly blended into the night, the small suitcase swallowed up by the vast space. The sound of its wheels rolling over the wooden path carried into the distance before fading away, leaving behind an empty porch, an old woman holding on to the wind, and the mermaid's song still lingering, relentless, as if trying to hold on to something that had already drifted far beyond reach. That morning, the dawn rose slowly. as if reluctant to leave the twilight behind, wanting to hold on a little longer to the words left unsaid the night before. A thin veil of sea mist drifted low over the sand, painting a blurred curtain between Marisha and the world ahead. Each footprint pressed deep into the wet sand was a permanent mark, only to be quietly filled in by the gentle waves right after, leaving nothing but silence. From a distance, Derek stood at the water's edge, his shadow long and slanting, as though he wanted to follow but was held back by an invisible tether. He had come home late the night before, and instead of finding her by the bed, he had only found the empty space where her suitcase had been. The footprints leading from the house to the sea felt like either an invitation or a farewell, he wasn't sure. Marisha did not turn her head, not because she didn't know he was there, but because she knew that if their eyes met, her resolve would falter. The sound of last night's waves still echoed in her heart, along with the mermaid's song she had heard as a farewell. She could feel each cold grain of sand seeping into her feet, each breath of morning wind waking her skin, as if etching this feeling into her for a lifetime. Derek quickened his pace, his breath unsteady as the distance between them closed. He wanted to say everything about his fear, about the times he had been on the verge of confessing but couldn't summon the courage, about his love for her even while knowing it had been wrong from the start. But with every step closer he took, she seemed farther away, not in distance, but in the time they had already lost. When at last he touched her shoulder, Marisha stopped. The wind swept her hair back, revealing a face that no longer held the innocence of the girl she once was. In her eyes was a different light, the light of a woman who understood the worth of love, of honor, and the cost of sacrifice. She didn't speak, but he could read in her gaze that the road ahead no longer had space for them to walk together. Offshore, the mermaid's golden scales flashed in the first light of day, a quiet farewell. The tide withdrew, revealing a long stretch of sand leading straight to the horizon, the path Marisha would now take alone. She drew in a deep breath of the salty air, as if to hold for the last time the scent of the place that had once been home. Derek remained where he stood, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, making no move to hold her back. Perhaps he understood that love, no matter how deep, could not overcome the truth. And that sometimes to love someone is to let them go, to leave them with a part of their soul untouched by further hurt. Marisha kept walking, her figure growing smaller against the brightening sky. The mermaid vanished beneath the waves, leaving the sea calm, as though no whisper had ever been sent. But Derek knew those sounds still existed. They had simply chosen to leave him along with her. When she was nothing more than a dot at the point where sea and sky met, Derek closed his eyes and listened to the waves one last time, like an answer without words. And he wondered if there would ever be a day, after swimming through all the distances of their past, when they might meet again not as lovers or as kin, but simply as two people who had once loved each other with all their hearts. The Savannah Sea kept breaking in steady waves, as if it had never witnessed a love story shatter on its shore. Marisha's figure had vanished, but those fading footprints would remain forever in the memory of those who knew the story. Somewhere offshore, the golden-scaled mermaid was perhaps still swimming in circles, guarding the truths that humans were not yet ready to face. This story is not only about love, but about choice. When one is forced to trade a piece of their heart to preserve honor and protect the ones they love. Some wounds cannot heal in a day or two, but time and courage will turn them into marks that help us grow. Perhaps one day, the waves will bring Marisha back, or Derek will find a way to swim through the past. But until then, we can only stand on the shore, listen to the sea, and wonder, if it were us, would we choose to stay or to leave? If you felt something from this story, leave a comment below. Would you choose truth or temporary peace? And if you want to know part 2, where fate brings them back together in a way no one could have imagined, share this video, follow the channel, and wait for the mermaid song to call your name again. Because sometimes, in order to heal, we must hear the story once more told by the waves themselves.